Hi everyone, welcome to Crochet Tutorials. In this video we're going to have a look at how to make the Mosaic granny square. It is a truly stunning square and everyone's going crazy for it at the moment. If you've never made it before, you may be looking at it thinking, holy moly, that looks really difficult. It's absolutely not. It is a granny square, and I know that it doesn't look like one, but it is. And if we turn it over, we can see that it is a granny square. It is just made with a front post treble crochet, or in the UK you know that as the front post double treble crochet, these stitches here. And that's all. It has, when you do a granny square, you do a cluster of 3 double crochets or treble crochets in the UK. In this version, that middle one is made as a front post instead. So it gives this amazing effect to the square and completely and utterly changes it. It doesn't look like a granny square from the front, but it does from the back. So I just wanted to actually, before we start, give you a couple of tips on how to make this. Tension is actually really important, and this is one of those patterns that if you're a bit of a loose crocheter, then you're going to actually love making this, and it is the pattern for you. When you make these front post double crochets, and indeed when you put in any of your stitches when you getting into the rounds, you will actually need to be a little bit more loose than you normally would. So, and the reason being is because if you don't, what will happen is your sides will kind of bow in like this. This is one I made where I kind of started with my normal tight stitching, and obviously for these others I've had to relax a fair bit more. So this one, you can see that its sides are just bowed in a little bit, and it could be blocked out. It's not an enormous deal, but yeah, certainly if you are a bit of a looser crocheter, then this is going to be the pattern for you. I've made a couple here, as you can see, to give you an idea of how these colours work. The pattern was actually written to be 8 rounds and for a colour change every 2 rounds, and it gives you this wonderful effect of this graduating colour out. It does tend to look best with a lighter colour in the middle and then graduating out to the darkest colour. But these have all been made, these 3 have been made using 4 colours. So changing colour every second or every 2 rounds. This one I made using 2 colours, and my daughter believes this one looks like buttered popcorn. And essentially all I did was change colour every 2 rounds, but only using the 2 colours. And then this one I made with just 2 colours and changing every 4 rounds. So, realistically, you don't have to stick to the rules of changing colours every 2 rounds. It does really look fantastic when you do, but of course you can change colours every 2 rounds and only have 2 colours involved. Definitely when you design your colour scheme for your squares, it really is entirely up to you, but they do tend to look best with the light colour in the middle and then graduate out, or do it the reverse and graduate out to the lighter colour. Entirely up to you. But as I said, it's an 8 round square. These ones are actually made in a 10 ply yarn, so a worsted weight yarn. This one was made in an 8-ply or a DK yarn, and you can see that there is a considerable difference between the size of these squares. This one's about 6 inches across, whereas this one goes to about 8-9 inches. Certainly if you were making a blanket and you wanted to make less squares, then the 10-ply yarn is for you, but it looks just as nice in an 8-ply. All of these are acrylic yarns, so I've just grabbed whatever yarn to have a look at some of the different colour combinations. Certainly with the 8-ply I used a 3.5mm hook, and with the 10-ply I've used a 5.5mm hook. Okay, so let's hop to it and have a look at how to make this very, very simple mosaic granny square. Okay, I should say before we start that if you haven't made a granny square before, it would be beneficial for you to be across all the techniques for making a granny square. I'll put a link to my granny square tutorial up here. It should appear on the screen now, but I'll also put that same link down in the description box. If you've never made a granny square, it is a good idea to be familiar with how to make a granny square, a normal granny square generally. Okay, so like I said, I'm using a 5.5mm hook. Just pop your slip knot onto that hook. And then with granny squares, essentially we just chain 4. You can use a magic ring if you'd prefer to have that hole completely closed in the middle. And then with a slip stitch, join the circle closed by inserting into the first chain. So this chain, insert, pull the yarn through, and then pull it through the loop on the hook. And then you've got this lovely little hole where you can work your clusters into. So we're going to chain 3 to get to the height of a double crochet, or in the UK you know that as a treble. And with granny squares, they are clusters of 3 stitches separated by a chain. In the corner it will be a chain 2, and on the sides it will be a chain 1. So we've got 1 stitch now. We just need to go back in and create another and another for our first cluster of 3. And then because between each of these clusters will be our starting corners, we're going to chain 2 and then put in another cluster of 3. 2, 2 and 3. And again, chain 2 for the corner and put in another cluster of 3. Chain 2, and then our final cluster of 3. So the central point of this and any granny square will have 4 clusters of 3 stitches in each, and a chain 2 between each cluster. And then we just need to slip stitch to the top of that chain 3 that we made in the beginning, and that is our first round complete. Now for this particular pattern, you can't turn your work. You may turn your work in a normal granny square. Frequently we do that to avoid it sort of moving off to the side, but in this pattern you can't, because the front of the square and the back look very different. You can't turn your work. So you actually can in this round, but it is the only round you can turn it in. So we may as well not do that. What we do is just slip stitch across the tops of these stitches to position ourselves into this next corner. And it is from each of these corners that we'll start every round. So then we chain 3 again and pop in the 2 double crochets or treble crochets to make the first half of the corner, and then chain 2 and put in the other half of the corner in that same corner space. So from now on, all your corners will be the classic granny square corners of 3 stitches, a chain 2 and 3 stitches. And then because we're on the side, because we're hovering over a cluster here, we're going to chain 1 and then pop in our next corner. So that is 3 double crochets or treble crochets if you're in the UK, a chain 2 and 3 more in that same space, and 3. And again, because we're hovering over a cluster here, we're going to chain 1 and then make our 3rd corner. And it is, as you can see, exactly the same as your normal granny square methodology. Chain 2 for the corner and pop in the other . It has just started to rain here, so I do hope you can't hear that, or if you can, then it's not too distracting. So we've got our 3 corners made with a cluster of 3, a chain 2 and another cluster of 3 in each corner. Between the corners we're chaining 1 and then popping in this last corner. So at the moment, this is exactly how a granny square works. Chain 2 for the corner, pop in the last 3 clusters or the last 3 stitches for our cluster, chain 1 for the side and then join to the top of that initial chain 3. And that's our first 2 rounds. So you should have something that looks like this. It is going to be the same as a normal granny square in these first 2 rounds. It's this next round that we start to pop in those front post stitches. But we need to change colour now. So all we need to do is tie off, grab the scissors and just cut that. Pull it closed. And then bring in our next colour. Okay, so for our second round, we need to join our colour. I always join my colour with a slip knot on my hook. However you prefer to join your colour is entirely up to you, but I think this is the most secure method. We join into any of these corners, so just pick a corner and join your colour on. I just join it on with a slip knot, a slip stitch, and then chain up 3 and work our corner as we normally do. So the cluster of 3 double crochets or treble crochets if you use the UK terminology, a chain 2 and 3 more, 2 and 3. And when we're over the side, we always chain 1 to get past the cluster, and then we're going to be working into these spaces. And when we work in this space, this is where things change a little bit from how we've worked these clusters here. We're going to put in a double crochet or a treble if you use UK terminology. Don't pull it down too tight, just give it a little tightening up, but not too much. And then we're going to put in a front post treble crochet or a front post double treble if you're using the UK terminology. And we need to put it around this stitch here. So immediately under that is always a middle stitch of the cluster, and that's the one we aim for every time. So to do that, we just yarn over twice and then go in on the right side of the particular stitch we're aiming for and come out on the left, just like that. So the hook just goes behind that stitch. And then we're going to grab the yarn and bring it through. And you need to kind of pull that yarn up so it's at the same height as the rest of the stitches. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. And don't worry if that looks a little bit baggy, it will be fine. Then we need to put in because our clusters are always 3 stitches, we need to put in our final double crochet that anchors at the same place this one did. So we just push that one aside a little bit, grab that and put in our double. Chain 1 to get over the cluster here, and then put in a corner as we normally would. So 3 double crochets, a chain 2 and 3 more. To make our corner. Then we chain 1 for the side again and we're at another space. So it is a double crochet. Don't pull it too tight, otherwise you'll bow in your edges. Yarn over twice for our front post treble crochet or double treble, depending on your terminology. Go in on the right side of the stitch, come out on the left, grab the yarn, pull it through, pull it up a little bit to make sure that you're not going to bow in those edges too much, and complete the stitch with the pulling through 3 times essentially. Put in your final stitch in that cluster, which is just a normal double crochet, chain 1 and make your next corner. I think if you're an experienced crocheter, you can probably see how this is going to play out for the remainder of the square. But what I'll do is just get to the end here and show you what we do in the next round. So continue to crochet like that, chaining 1 when you're over a cluster, a double crochet, a front post treble crochet and a double crochet in each space. Make your corner and I'll join you back when we're at the end. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you've reached the end of the 3rd round, and you've only got 1 of the front post double crochets into the middle of the clusters in your 1st round. And from there, in the next round, we're going to be putting the front post double crochets in these clusters here. So, but before we do that, we need to chain 1 after our double crochet to get across this particular cluster, slip stitch to the top of that initial chain 3, and then we need to go on to our next round. This isn't a colour change round, so we'll have to get ourselves into this corner. So we're going to just slip stitch across into that corner so we can start in a logical starting position. And then chain 3 for the beginning. Put in your corner, so that's 2 more double crochets. A chain 2 and 3 more double crochets. And just as we did before, when we're hovering over a cluster, we're chaining 1. And then we're working into this space here. And with a granny square, you know it, we're always working into the spaces. But in this instance, we're making a front post double crochet around this stitch in the cluster 2 rounds below. Pulling up, yarning over, pulling through 2, yarning over, pulling through 2, yarning over and pulling through 2, and then putting in the normal double crochet stitch right next to it, chaining 1, and then working into this space here. Front post double crochet, yarn over twice, around the stitch, pulling right up as far as we can go, and completing the stitch, and then putting in the double crochet. Chain 1, and then we're working our corner. And it really is as easy as that. When you get the hang of this, really all you're doing, you're making a granny square. The only difference is that one of your stitches in each cluster after the second round is a front post. So you can see in this third round, we only have 4. In the 4th round, we're going to have 8 front post stitches. And of course, as you get further along the round, you have more front post stitches. I'll let you complete this round and I'll meet you back up for the new colour change. Okay, at the end of this round, same thing, chain 1 after your last cluster and slip stitch to the top of your chain 3. Pull the yarn through and snip it off. Now that is how it should look after the end of the 4th round. You've got the front post double crochets only happening in 2 of the rounds at this stage. So then we're going to grab the new colour. Okay, so I've got this kind of candy kind of pink. It's not a whole lot different to the initial pink that I've used here, but it will look different once we've got it in place. Again, I'm slip stitching from a slip knot on my hook into the corner, chaining up 3 and placing in my first corner. It really is, I'm sure if you have made plenty of crochet items, that you know exactly where this is going and how to do the rest of the square. So I'll just show you in this first side. Of course, we're chaining 1 for the side, and then we're going to be working into this space and this cluster. So a double crochet, our front post double crochet, pulling it up and yarning over and pulling through 2 loops 3 times, and our second double crochet to complete the cluster. Now is the only thing that differs for the rest of the square, and that's that instead of working into just a normal stitch, we're actually going to be working into a front post stitch. So we're in this space here, and then the stitch immediately under it is this front post stitch. So all we're going to do is go around it, pull up the yarn as we normally would, and finish the cluster as per normal. Chain 1, and then for this one we're back to a normal stitch that was a corner 2 rounds ago. And complete that cluster. So you can see there that in the next round we're actually going to be going around these clusters as well as these ones here. So that's the way the front post stitches get built up, and have this different colour look to them, which is just fascinating and beautiful. So I'll let you finish that round, of course, chaining 1 but on the sides and chaining 2 in your corners, doing your front post stitches, and I'll meet you back at the end. Okay, so I'm at the end of this round. Just need to make sure you've chained 1, always make sure you've chained 1, and crochet or slip stitch into the top of that initial chain 3 that we made to start the round. And again, because this is only our first round in this colour, we need to slip stitch into the corner to start in that corner position. It's much better with this pattern if you start in that corner position every time. You won't get lost. So again, for this round, we're making a corner initially. Then we're going to be working into this space here and the front with the front post around that stitch of that cluster. And essentially every round we're working a front post in the stitches, the clusters that are in the corner in the middle stitch, around that middle stitch. But then we're also going to be working around these clusters or these stitches in this round. So then next round we'll be working in these stitches. So feel free to rewind if you're a little bit concerned about how you might complete this next round. But essentially we need a corner of 3 double crochets separated, or sorry, 6 double crochets really, isn't it? Separated by a chain 2. So 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets, and we chain 1 along the side, put in our first double crochet in this cluster, yarn over twice, front post, treble crochet or front post double treble crochet around that first stitch, and then put in the other double crochet in the cluster, chain 1, and work into the next space, double crochet, front post around the front post, and double crochet to finish that cluster. And we just do the same thing all the way along. So I'm sure you've seen by now that this is a deceptively simple, very simple square, but enormously effective, and certainly would make a wonderful blanket. It'd look great in a bag, or even a cardigan if you're that clever. Chaining 1 and going into the next space. It really is as easy as that. Coming around that center stitch from that cluster in the corner, and then we're at our corner. We don't need to chain 2, we only need to chain 1. I think because I said corner. But of course chaining 1 on the sides and chaining 2 in the corner is pretty standard with granny squares. Some people might chain 2 on the side and 3 in the corners, but that tends to make it a fair bit bigger. Or your spaces are quite big then, and these little spaces are a little bit more intimate. Okay, so I'll see you when we complete this round. Okay, so at the end of this round, this really is you're really starting to see the pattern, and it's looking fantastic. I'm sure yours is looking marvelous. I've already slip stitched to the 3rd chain, and now I just need to tie off and change colour. Okay, my next colour is a considerably darker pink, but again, it really doesn't matter what colours you use. As you can see, I'll just secure this onto that corner. As you can see with this one here, I've used a purple around the outside, but it still looks really lovely. So, all right, so this is the last 2 rounds, and they operate in exactly the same fashion as the rest have. We're making a corner, with the chain 2 between the 2 clusters of 3 double crochets, and then we're chaining 1 as we work along the edges. Of course, we're front post treble crocheting around this particular stitch, and in each corner we'll be doing that, and then every other front post treble we make will be actually around front post trebles. So chain 1 along the side into the next space, and work your front post treble around that front post treble. If it wants to come through, there we go. Complete that cluster, chain 1, and the same thing. So you may have gone off on your own and completed this square without this part of the video. That's absolutely fine. The only thing that I do need to say is absolute credit to whoever designed this. I'm not entirely sure who did design it, but it is just a fantastic adaptation of the humble granny square. And, you know, as I said at the beginning of the video, everyone is going crazy for this square at the moment. Dropped all my loops, but everyone is going crazy for this square at the moment, so it certainly is on trend. All right, and so that's our last front post that we need to crochet around for this side, but then of course we've got our corner one. You don't forget him. So just pop that one in. And you might notice I have been crocheting over my tails for my colour joins. You don't have to. I just find it is a little bit easier to crochet over. I do still tend to go in and sew in the very ends at the end of the square anyway. Anyone who knows me knows that I don't consider a square completed until the ends are sewn in. So that's just me. Don't want to preach about that. You can do however you like. So you can see that that next colour it's a dark frame. It actually looks quite red on the camera there, but it is just a hot pink. So we're going to be going around that whole way, it's exactly the same thing, and then coming and doing a second round of this same colour. So when you get back to here, join to your top of your chain 3 at the beginning, and then slip stitch across until you're in that corner position like normal, and I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so this is the end. I've just got to tie or slip stitch to my 3rd chain and then tie off. And that is the Mosaic granny square. I'm sure yours looks wonderful, irrespective of what colours you use, because they always look just stunning with this texture across them. When you look at the other side, you do have a couple of ends to sew in, but they're really easy to just sew in underneath the bottoms of these stitches. So have a go at making the Mosaic granny square. Yeah, it really does look quite red on the camera, but it is pink. I guess it doesn't matter. You know, they all should have these wonderful X's across them. And when you, you know, join them side by side, they just, you know, not necessarily these colours, but they just look stunning all together. I've seen some that are, you know, there's pink squares, there's blue squares, there's yellows, there's oranges. That is a lot of different colour yarns, and you do need to make sure that your gradients are similar. So in this case, you know, maybe you'd use the white for each of the squares, but then you'd need a really light blue and then a kind of mid blue and maybe a royal blue that sits on the outside, and the same with the yellows and the oranges. But go mad. It is a wonderful square. I do thank you for joining me. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. And make sure you hit that bell icon to keep you updated of any of the latest video releases on this channel. I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.